time. Very good morning indeed to you. And it's hard to know where to begin, isn't it? Is it the dodgy dealings over the £60,000 decoration scheme in the flat above number 11 Downing Street? Is it the claim in the Sunday Times yesterday, and very significantly for those who perhaps pay more attention than is healthy to such matters, absolutely blown sky high on the front page of the Daily Mail this morning. Boris Johnson reported to have said, "Let the bodies pile high in their thousands." This remark said to have come after he reluctantly imposed the second lockdown. And then a story that I suspect would have garnered a heck of a lot more attention if there weren't so many splinters of shrapnel spreading all over this developing circular firing squad. Johnson also, it has emerged, and this isn't allegedly or reportedly, this is a statement of fact, a statement of record that hasn't been opposed, sat down with Edward Woodward, who you'll remember was, until the debacle of the so-called European Super League, was the sort of head honcho, the head UK honcho at Manchester United, just days before the launch of the controversial European Super League. So perfectly possible, of course, that he sat down with Edward Woodward, and neither of them mentioned the single most important item of information in possession of at least one of them. Perfectly possible it didn't come up at all. Also perfectly possible that Johnson has done what Johnson does and tossed a coin, shouted heads and tails, and then done a quick lap of honour however it landed. Did he give the nod to Woodward? I do not know. Did he come out objecting to the plan as soon as the public fury had been established? Oh, yes, he did. So how do we do today's show? Do you need me to talk you through the facts? Because I appreciate that despite the Mail breaking ranks, the British media is still so dominated by people clinging to the carcass both of Brexit and of Boris Johnson's quotes, reputation, end quotes, that you may need a little bit of a steer into what, well, some of us will, won't we? I hope you don't feel patronised if you're more across the facts than I am by the suggestion that some people won't be. I'm not talking about you. So the flat refurbishment, as we began to report last week or reflect last week, is significant because it speaks of a contempt for the rules, for the standards. Again, I know what you're thinking. Oh, Boris Johnson demonstrates contempt for basic morality or ethics. Yeah, okay. Funny, isn't it? But now, of course, he stands accused of acting unethically and possibly illegally, or at least contemplating illegal actions, by Dominic Cummings, the eminence grise, the power behind the throne, the architect of Boris Johnson's premiership, really, because without all the nonsense spouted by Cummings and co in the referendum, there would be no Boris Johnson premiership. He would not be in Downing Street. So he has now started accusing Johnson. I think three key areas. The first is that the leak, was it last October, the second lockdown leak, which everyone was furious about, and which the Cabinet Secretary was investigating. Johnson reportedly was worried that the trail would lead to a chap who is very good friends with his current girlfriend. And he reportedly then said to Dominic Cummings, "Oh, this will be awful. If I have to sack this fellow, Henry Newman, Carrie, that's his current girlfriend, will be furious. Is there any way we can sort of make the whole thing go away?" And Cummings claims at this point he distanced himself from events. And please don't fall into the trap of thinking Cummings is a paragon of virtue of any kind, any way, shape or form, because he's only spitting nails out of frustration at his own defenestration and sidelining by, reportedly, Boris Johnson's current girlfriend, Carrie Symonds. I don't like the flavour or the timbre of some of the coverage, which is a little bit sort of 1950s misogyny, but I'm afraid that some of the facts of the matter lend themselves, sadly, to that analysis. So he reportedly wanted to call off an inquiry into a major leak because he was worried that the source of the leak would turn out to be his partner's pal. Oof. So that would be point number one. Point number two then becomes the story today about the decision to institute that lockdown, which you'll remember even in the run-up to Christmas, Johnson was accusing Keir Starmer of being, and I quote, inhuman, end quote, inhuman, for wanting Christmas celebrations to be curtailed. It's reported today, and you'll remember also that I think more people died in that period, that post-Christmas period, than at any other period in the whole of the pandemic. So just when we'd finally got a handle of sorts on things, Johnson blew the bloody doors off. And allegedly said, let the bodies pile high in their thousands, which I have to tell you, before I move on to the third element of the conversation, which is the refurbishment of the flat, I have to tell you that during the pandemic, I thought long and hard about what language to use in the context of the body count, and suggested to you that counting corpses was, although a very brutal and grim vocabulary, it was necessary to remind us that these were real stories involving real people and real deaths rather than mere statistics. So I don't know at what point the death count in this country became almost too big to contemplate. But that phrase there is actually, because Johnson never thought it would see the light of day, if he did say it. If he didn't, I presume he'll be suing everybody involved by lunchtime today. I don't know if he can afford the lawyers. But anyway, the line, let the bodies pile high in their thousands, is heartbreaking and horrific because it actually acknowledges the humanity of the victims of the pandemic and simultaneously dismisses them and their families. If you have lost somebody as a result, perhaps, or in the immediate aftermath of that Christmas loosening, God knows how you're processing this information today, especially if you were understandably and entirely forgivably labouring under the illusion that he wasn't some sort of amoral paragon of selfishness. Well, so that's story number 2. Story number 3 is the flat, which it seems they did up 60 grand. I mean, who here hasn't spent 60 grand on wallpaper? Keith does that before breakfast every Thursday. Like, he's an Instagram influencer, a wallpaper Instagram influencer, so he repapers the spare room every second Wednesday. 11 minutes after 10. So the refurbishment of the flat, it looks like they sort of did it. And then, again, reports that Cummings considered this to be deeply dodgy behaviour, I think. They did it, couldn't really afford it. Conservative Party sort of paid for it. The cat got out of bag, at which point they tried to set up some sort of trust that could claim to be refurbishing the Downing Street estate, rather than simply tarting up the flat in which Johnson currently resides. The cat got out of the bag, so there's a sort of retrospective engineering of the bill, which Johnson ends up having to pay despite having moved heaven and earth previously in order to avoid paying it. And then you get people like the Secretary of State for Flags and Defence turning up in all the studios today claiming that somehow, because he eventually forked out for it after trying every trick in the book to avoid forking out for it, there is somehow nothing to see here. Whew. Amazing, isn't it, how all of these ministers queued up to defend Dominic Cummings, sacrificed any vestige of integrity that they may have still possessed upon the altar of protecting Dominic Cummings' career, and then, as was probably clear to you at the time, he turns around and opens fire on effectively all of them. How do you defend Boris Johnson today if you defended Dominic Cummings over the Barnard Castle debacle? That's a question for the ages. I haven't got a Scooby-Doo how you would do that, but you would have to turn off both your intellect and, in many ways, your conscience. So here's the question, and it's an incredibly simple question, and it's quite a nice day, actually, because people who've been sort of embarrassed into not contributing to the programme in recent months, as the observable reality of Brexit has emerged, and as the, as Boris Johnson would call it, the bodies have piled high in their thousands, and yet you've had to try to cling to the idea that there isn't an absolute skip fire at the heart of our government. You're welcome today because you can stick up for one of them and criticise the other. So finally, you can actually loosen your scarf today because it's either Cummings who's telling the truth or Boris Johnson. And if your football-style allegiances to the Conservative Party and or the Vote Leave project have previously prevented you from criticising either of them, today you can't keep that up. You cannot simultaneously say Cummings is fantastic, no problem at all with Barnard Castle, he's a stand-up guy, and Johnson is a legend, absolutely love him, top bants, brilliant bloke. You can't have both anymore. So this is the problem, of course, with unthinking sycophancy stroke loyalty, is that eventually they will let you down. The leaders will let you down. The people who have lied to you, seduced you, gulled you into a false sense of security, persuaded you to act against your own and indeed the national interest, eventually they'll let you down. So today, you've got to choose. Anyone can choose. Literally anyone. You could be the most dyed-in-the-wool Tory voter in the country, but one of these men has betrayed you, and I want to know which one you think it is. Who's telling the truth, Boris Johnson or Dominic Cummings? I think I'll keep score today, so I really would encourage as many people as possible to get involved. In a sense, I would put you nearer to the front of the queue if you were, until the last week or so, persuaded by the calibre of both of these men. And another story, I don't know if you've noticed, I think this is huge. Friday night, a chap called Eddie Lister resigned. Now, he was at the heart of Boris Johnson's regime, both at Downing Street and at City Hall. I'll talk you through the details of that story a little later as well, because it pains me to say it, it's possible that there are some corners of the British media operated by people who don't think you deserve all the facts, who don't think you deserve all the details, who don't think you deserve all the knowledge. Thankfully, you've stumbled into a corner that believes you absolutely deserve the facts of all of these matters. But we'll begin today. So that Eddie Lister story, actually, I'd put him fourth. He's one of the people that apologists for Boris Johnson used to say, well, obviously he's just a bit of a clown. He's a top PR man. The public love him, but, you know, you wouldn't let him play with matches. But he surrounds himself with good people, good quality people. This was certainly the defence in the Mayor of London days. He surrounds himself with good quality people, and they insulate him from his own foibles and failings. Well, the foibles and failings are on full display at the moment, and one of the key so-called gatekeepers, or one of the people who's supposed to mitigate Johnson's natural instincts for dishonesty and catastrophe, well, he's already walked the plank over what looked like intriguing potential conflicts of interest. So it is literally all kicking off. But of course, if I had spent the last few years telling you that Brexit was a brilliant idea and Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy, I'd probably now be putting enormous amounts of energy into persuading you that there's nothing to see here. Please move along. Nobody cares. It's a story just for the bubble. Boris Johnson and his key consigliere are biting chunks out of each other on the public stage. But nothing. I mean, Diane Abbott once drank a mojito on a train. Can we please focus on what matters? So what's it going to be? 0345 60 60 973. Who do you believe? Or rather, who don't you believe? You can't have both, and you can't have neither. One of them's telling the truth. Let's start with the bodies piled high. Do you believe Boris Johnson is the sort of man who would have said, let the bodies pile high in their thousands, rather than deliver bad news to the British public? Or is Cummings doing what he did during the referendum and riding roughshod over public confidence? It's your call. I mean, of course, if you sit where I sit politically and you've pointed out what I've been pointing out for the last few years, this actually is win-win. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. So, I mean, hard to pick them apart, aren't they? But there are certainly three strands to the story. The 60 grand wallpaper gate, the calling off an inquiry because of fears that it would lead to a friend of his girlfriend gate, and the bodies piled high story, allegation, the reluctance to order that third lockdown, not second, sorry, I think I misspoke earlier. I saw Johnson say that he would rather see bodies pile high in their thousands than order another one, which is actually, if you were listening to my programme at the time, it's entirely of a piece with our analysis, this sense that they didn't care really about the carnage or the count of the corpse count, but cared weirdly only about getting things reopened. I mean, do you remember all the effort put into saying, why are people still working from home? Why are the pubs shut? It's quite bizarre. Like, most of them have gone quiet, but 22 of them sent a letter to a newspaper yesterday, which failed entirely to mention that many of the signatories have got absolutely everything wrong at every single stage of this saga. Also, of course, a question that should be asked probably 1 million times more often than it is. Who funds them? Who funds you? Where does the money come from? 22 after 10. Who do you believe, Johnson or Cummings? Sean's in Launceston in Cornwall. Sean, what do you reckon? Talk about a rock and a hard place.
Morning, James. A lovely day here in Launceston.
Yes, I'm sure.
Yes, indeed so. Cummings or Johnson. On the topic of thousands of bodies being piled high, we all know, I think we all know at least, Johnson has a comfort blanket he surrounds himself in buffoonery.
Yes.
Buffoonery and throwaway statements. You've just got to look at any of his television interviews and the amount of nonsense and gobbledygook that he throws in as a smokescreen.
He's got no self-control, has he? It's bizarre. I mean,
No.
leaving aside his incontinent sex life, but he has no self-control. That bunny huggers thing last week, which we didn't get around to covering, but it's quite bizarre. And there you are chuckling away, which is part of the problem. And I'm guilty as well, so please don't think I'm singling you out. But we all go, even those of us who can see him for exactly what it is, are somehow susceptible to the clowning, aren't we? But there's nothing funny about this comment. Nothing funny about today's story.
No. I don't think either of us were. I know I wasn't. At least I wasn't present when this supposed comment was made. But in a small amount of defence, we weren't privy to the context of the comment or the intention behind it.
I agree with
It
you.
have been a throwaway comment in a cabinet meeting, perhaps.
Well, not even a cabinet meeting. It'd be this small groupings that he favours over proper collegiate government. And in fact, you've preempted something I was going to say a little later, which is that if you're surrounded by people who you think you can trust, you say things in the knowledge or in the belief that they will never go any further. And it's, in a sense, and people may not agree with this and they can ring in and tear a strip off both of us, but what you're suggesting is it's actually dishonourable to strip it out of all context and stick it on the front page of a newspaper.
And that's something that Cummings is very good at.
Yes, he is.
Sound bites. He's very good at cherry picking.
Well,
the sound bite.
If you look at the billion,
at the opportune time,
yes,
cause maximum damage.
Well, that suggests you think it's true that Johnson did say it, but you've got
I do,
with mitigating evidence. Mitigation, Sean, is the word.
Indeed, I think you've summed it up very eloquently there, James. And yeah, indeed, so it's likely to be true. But the context will never be known by the likes of us.
Well, you never know. Once the Mail have got their teeth into something, history suggests that it's rare that we approve of their targets, but you have to acknowledge history suggests they never let go. So what about the idea that he wanted to call off an inquiry into the leak because he was worried that it would lead to his girlfriend's best mate? Yes or no?
I'm afraid I'm not really I've not been following that story, I'm afraid, James. I'm not really a footballist.
But that's not the football story. We haven't even got onto that yet. So that's 5 stories. You're quite right, with Lister and Woodward. So 1-0 to Cummings, in the sense of who do you actually believe on this occasion, not Johnson. And I think Sean makes a valid point, an important point, actually. I think Johnson said it, but I also think that saying it in a room privately full of people you can trust doesn't mean that you would that it's a bridge that you would yourself die on. I hope that makes sense. I hope it doesn't sound like I'm making excuses for him. Feel free to pick it apart if you do. 0345 60 60973. Clearly no accident either that Michael Gove appears in the 4th paragraph of the story on the front of the Mail. It allegedly came after Michael Gove warned Mr Johnson that soldiers would be needed to guard hospitals overrun with COVID victims. So Michael Gove somehow mysteriously cast as the good guy in this story on the front page of a newspaper for which his wife writes a column. I tell you what, it's coincidence after coincidence after coincidence this morning, isn't it? Sam's in Egham. Who do you believe?
I think... Thank you for having me on. I think that I agree with your last caller that I believe Dominic Cummings, surprisingly.
Why surprisingly? I mean, it's almost a rhetorical question, that, but I'd love to hear your answer.
Because I think he actually believed in the lies that we now know to be lies about Brexit. I think he thought Brexit was a goal worth achieving through any means possible.
The end would be justified.
Yeah,
would justify any means. That's a great point.
I think there were hints that he disagreed with the view that he had been preventing lockdowns initially in March 2020.
Yes,
there was stuff in the papers early then. I think possibly he did actually have some kind of moral compass and wanted a lockdown.
Whoa, that's quite a reach. As on that, no, I think it's just not a phrase I ever expected to hear in the context of Dominic Cummings. Such is the excitement of my life, Sam. I was reminding myself this weekend of and you're not about to mishear me, the £1 billion targeted Facebook adverts that were sent out in the last week of the referendum via a mysterious Canadian firm, which some people believe may have had links to Cambridge Analytica, and those were very much... I mean, I'm told there's a tape of Channel 4 News with Cummings saying that he thought that was the clincher, these billion adverts, telling people who'd been carefully targeted and selected things like the European Union killed polar bears and all that kind of thing. So moral compass can stand, can't it? But only in the context of you describing the end justifying the means. So he truly had that evangelical belief that anything he did would justify the goal.
If you read his blog, his most recent, it's all about how AI regulation by the EU will destroy technology firms and stuff.
Yes.
So I think he really did believe that, and I think that it's easy to take Boris Johnson's words out of context, like your last caller said. If he said something like, over my dead body, we'll have a third lockdown, and followed up with some ridiculous rhetorical flourish, you could easily end up with that.
But you're being generous. You're being generous. You're overlooking the possibility that, do you know what?
Meant it.
Well, can I tell you why I think that is possible? And it's bizarre, and it took a while to land, because I found Second World War analogies in the early days of the pandemic so hilarious and ridiculous. The idea that we didn't shut pubs during the Blitz, as if the Luftwaffe's bombs were somehow contagious. You could take home something that you'd caught from a bomb and infect everybody in your house a week later. I mean, we know that was ridiculous. But the First World War, the more one learns about the First World War, the more we see a very casual and callous disregard for the lives of the soldiers. The trench warfare, so brilliantly lampooned in Blackadder, just sending men to their deaths for the sake of a few inches. So I don't know,
Well, and also the beginning of it, when he said you must prepare for your loved ones to die prematurely.
Yes.
That first broadcast. So I think he was always listening to those, that Swedish guy. Can't remember his name.
No, Anders, and they still, that world view is still bubbling away. I stumbled into the anti-sanity march in London this weekend, and even after months of covering this, absolutely staggering scenes. People were wearing stars based on the gold stars, yellow stars that Jews were forced to wear during the Nazi regime in Germany. They were wearing those. One woman I saw interviewed claiming it was genocide, the lockdown. I'm genuinely baffled by that still. May turn to it a little later in the programme. All Human Life is here. 0345 60 60973 is the number you need. It's not looking good for Johnson, albeit that people so far believe he probably said it, let the bodies pile high in their thousands, but that the context could perhaps provide some mitigation or defence. Anybody want to defend the Prime Minister at this time? And remember, I'd then lead you on to the flat refurbishment, the leak report. I got to bring you up to speed with the resignation of another of his key consiglieres late on Friday night under cloak of this news avalanche, and then reports that he had a meeting with the Manchester United chief exec, Edward Woodward, just a couple of days before the European Super League was announced. Possible, I suppose, that no mention was made of the single most important thing on Edward Woodward's agenda, but I'm going to have to stop doing that joke. It's making my lips numb. But it would be quite a coincidence. 10:31 is the time. Holly Harris has your headlines. 10:35 is the time. I don't mind. In fact, I like being lied to because it upsets people like you. It doesn't matter where you sit politically. If that is truly your modus operandi, and regular listeners will know I'm quoting a caller from a couple of years ago describing Donald Trump, and he added, and Sadiq Khan, who's a nice bloke, Steve. I know it's all lies, but I love it because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. And look where that led, with Donald Trump inspiring an attack upon the seat of American government itself, which put the life of his own vice president at risk, and the continuing denial of the simple mathematical fact of the result of the last American election. I mean, incredible. I still say those words out loud, thinking this isn't supposed to happen in my era, in my part of the world, in my country, or my side of the planet, the Western world. Naive, perhaps, even perhaps a little patronising, but I always try to be honest with you. So, you know that the stories surrounding Boris Johnson are gathering pace, but you know also that the tanks, the epic pantechnicons, the behemoths of British media are still largely on side. It's the male that's broken ranks. You could list off the top of your head a dozen people on the payroll of various Murdoch rags that will still be claiming that Johnson's done nothing wrong, or if they can't do that, and to be fair, a few of them are honest enough not to pretend that Johnson's done nothing wrong, so instead they reach immediately for, well, the public don't care. If the public don't care about this, it's because it hasn't been properly explained to them. That's all. And whose job is it to properly explain things to the British public, if not the people who get paid to report things to the British public? So I love that sort of circular argument. Oh, no, it's not important. People don't care. People don't care. It's because we're not doing our job properly. But, of course, yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a catch-all observation. 10:37 is the time. Who do you think is telling the truth, Johnson or Cummings? Did he say let the bodies pile high in their thousands? Because the alternative would be the third lockdown that he was so reluctant to institute. Late to the first, late to the second, prepared to see the death toll go through the roof rather than introduce the third. Of course, he introduced it late after confusion and obfuscation, and as a result of that, the bodies did pile high in their thousands. That's the tragedy here. That's the story, really, behind the headline. He eventually, again, opted for the worst of all possible worlds. Whatever the opposite of having your cake and eating it is. That's what he did. He ended up having to do the third lockdown, but it was by then so confused and so late that the bodies piled up in their thousands anyway. Oh, my days. Even I get taken by surprise by recent history soon. There's so much of it in front of us. You lose sight of the detail. You can't see the wood for the proverbial trees. So the report is that he was prepared. Indeed, he wanted to let the bodies pile high in their thousands rather than deliver the, quotes, bad news of a third lockdown. In the end, he was overtaken by events and evidence, so he had to institute the third lockdown over the Christmas period. But it was so half-arsed, confused and late, that the bodies piled up in their thousands anyway. So he got the bodies piling up in their thousands and the third lockdown. Oh, boy, I apologise. It's taken me 39 minutes to realise that. Wolf's in Hampshire. Wolf, what would you like to say?
Well, I'd like to say that I think you're being deeply unfair about Boris and Dominic.
It's not me. I'm just reporting what people have reportedly said.
Oh, absolutely. But you're pitting them against each other to say, who do you believe?
Yes.
When you're talking about two of the brightest minds in our nation. It doesn't matter who you believe.
Right.
And I'd like to go back to
why not?
something.
If they're both saying the opposite of each other, surely the truth matters, doesn't it? Or has that ship sailed for you already?
You said it just a minute ago about how we don't care as a people because the way that it's reported is that, no one cares about it. And that's important. We're not supposed to care.
No.
Because we can't go off and go and live our lives and go to work and be productive members of society and make money for the great British nation if we care about what these people are saying. It's their job to run the country. They know what they're doing. It's our job to go to work. Like Boris said, we needed to get back to work. Because if we don't work, how are people going to make their money? How is business going to keep going? How is the GDP of our country going to keep going up? How is Wetherspoons going to get people through the doors?
I know your tongue is in your cheek, but I can't work out how much of it is in your cheek.
Certainly not, no.
But, I mean, I do want to know who you think is telling the truth, regardless of your other issues, other points, which are powerful and interesting. But who do you... Because they can't both be telling the truth about the flat, about the leak, or about the bodies piling high in their thousands.
No. It's strategic lying, because they're both such big minds.
Listen, stop the sarcasm, will you? They're not working on... So tell me who you think, because I wouldn't... ordinarily, you've got the bloke who stuck 350 million quid on the side of a bus and a bloke who's never told the truth to anybody in his life. Who are you going to pick? Who are you going to trust on this occasion?
I mean, we're not supposed to trust either of them.
No, but I want to know who you believe. This joke isn't funny anymore. Who do you believe personally?
You're missing the point.
Well, you're missing the opportunity. Nick's in Paddington. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Basically, you're such a rascal, aren't you? You ask if Johnson's telling the truth or not. It's like asking what poached religion is and what bears do in the woods. I mean,
not necessarily. You know what I say at this point. Even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And Cummings doesn't exactly have a track record for probity, honesty and integrity. So it's a rock and a hard place, I grant you, but you have to pick the rock or the hard place.
Well, you asked the million-dollar question again and again and again. Who cares? Because you know what? Cummings doesn't care. He doesn't care about party politics. He's not a member of the Conservative Party.
No, but I see that as a positive, don't you?
Well, yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a lot of respect for the bloke. I hate him with a vengeance, but I've got a lot of respect for somebody who stands by the ideology, because he doesn't care about the money, he doesn't care about creativity, he doesn't even care about interior design, does he? Wallpaper. Yeah, he's a man at Sports Direct in his shell suit outside Downing Street. But at the end of the day, he cares about one thing, and that's his ideology. He's passionately driven by an ideology that he thinks is right.
What is his ideology? I appreciate that you could write an essay about that, but just give me the edited highlights.
Well, I think he's on some sort of a mission to save the world, because he doesn't believe that everybody's entitled to live a fair life. He wants to close the feudal system.
I think his ideology is basically that Dominic Cummings should be in charge of everything. I don't think it extends much further than that.
Well, his thinking should. Somebody else can do the legwork.
Yeah, maybe.
And I think Boris has served his purpose. Let's face it. But Cummings had massive backing to get Brexit through. He had everything on his side, all the tech, all the money, and he is untouchable. And having got the first shot,
I can't say he's untouchable. He got fired.
Well, he didn't, though, did he?
Yes, he did.
I
can go higher than you. However high you can go, I can go higher.
Oh, come on, he's doing the same job in a different office.
No, he's not. This is two people playing fast and loose with the facts in quick succession. I tell you now, and I'll tell you straight, he did not want to walk that particular plank. He did not want to be handed those sandwiches wrapped in that roadmap, and he's been sitting there fuming and spitting nails ever since. So that I'm afraid is not open to debate. I still don't know, any more than I did with the last lad, who you think is telling the truth on this occasion.
I think Cummings is telling the truth. I really do. He got one in, and Boris can't come back now with the same accusation.
We could sue him.
Two children squabbling in a plane.
Well, we can only sue if his name is on it, of course. The expectation is that Cummings will accuse the Prime Minister of putting lives at risk by blocking Priti Patel's plan to close the borders at the start of the COVID crisis. So there is Priti Patel appearing in the coverage as an opponent to the policies that she then spent a year defending and championing. So that's Gove, who was urging the third lockdown. Priti Patel, who wanted to close the borders. Anyone else on that list yet? Raab is silent, isn't he? Which, in normal circumstances, would be something for which we should all be grateful. But it seems significant in the current context. So, weirdly, and again, I know that scarf is still very tightly knotted, but if you've been singing the praises of Priti Patel and Michael Gove and Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson, how do you keep it? I mean, I suppose just pretending that none of it matters and looking the other way, having a chat about, I don't know, I haven't even gone that far into the newspapers today to know what the major distractions of the moment are. I'm sure the Telegraph has got something about language. No, I did see one. I did see a story. What was it about? Hang on, it'll come to me in a minute. No, it's gone. Anyway, it's completely meaningless and trivial, but you'll be pretending that it's important rather than talking about what is essentially the final scene of Reservoir Dogs, except with Priti Patel, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings. Who will turn out to be? Please remember this, right, James? Mr. White. It is 10 minutes to 11. And do you know, and you won't believe this, which is fine, but it's true, I'd forgotten about Dyson until they played Eddie's Trail just there from the end of last week. I mean, isn't that astonishing? So we'll add that to the list. The refurbishment of the flat that he moved heaven and earth to avoid paying for. The report or allegation from Dominic Cummings, direct from Dominic Cummings, that he wanted to call off an investigation into who leaked details of the second lockdown because he was worried that the trail would lead to a chap who is very good friends with his girlfriend, Boris Johnson's girlfriend. The report yesterday and blown up on the front of the Mail today that he was prepared to watch the bodies pile high in their thousands rather than called the third lockdown, which, of course, he eventually called so late and so cack-handedly that it caused the bodies to pile up in their thousands anyway. So those are the three stories of the moment. I'm interested in the Eddie Lister story, the resignation of a key aide who was working for him at the heart of City Hall and Downing Street, while simultaneously fulfilling or holding posts on various companies of interest. The meeting with Edward Woodward, the Manchester United supremo, who resigned after the debacle of the European Super League last week alone. Boris Johnson met with him just a couple of days before that European Super League was announced, creating questions over whether in fact he knew about it, and gave it a nod before miraculously U-turning and condemning it after public feeling was made clear. And then you've got James Dyson, of course, another story that many people were desperate to poo-poo and dismiss. But the fact that Boris Johnson was exchanging private text messages, pledging to offer preferential taxation treatment to staff members of a company that didn't end up producing any used ventilators, companies that had ventilators to spare, companies that had expertise coming out of their ears, companies that actually had kit in place and were desperate to get it into NHS hospitals, couldn't get their calls returned by anyone. Whereas James Dyson, prominent Brexiter, who of course upsticked and moved the entire operation to Singapore, I mean, what patriot wouldn't? He was having private cosy text exchanges with the Prime Minister, while companies actually with ventilators ready to go couldn't get arrested. And on it goes. But there's nothing to see here. Absolutely nothing to see here. It's just a Westminster bubble story. 0345 6060 You will get through, actually, if you want to pick up on anything that's passed so far on the programme, or, in the first instance, tell me who you believe at the moment. Cummings and Johnson are going toe-to-toe. And so far, with all of the obvious and usual reservations, Dominic Cummings has got the nod. Bob's in Maidstone. Bob, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome, Bob.
Firstly, I think Cummings is telling the truth. And I suspect this whole thing is a Tory master plan from the get-go to get Gove into number 10.
Well, what do you mean by Tory, though? Because it's certainly not Johnson's master plan, is it?
I don't think he knows anything about it. I think they've used him as a puppet to win the election because, for reasons unknown, the people love him.
It's not reasons unknown. I fell for it myself 12, 13 years ago.
Only as mayor.
Yeah, but still, I fell for it. It's that you believe that very carefully cultivated exterior that's been in place since he realised at about the age of 13 that if he went by the name of Boris rather than the name he was actually given and called, Alexander, then it would help create a sort of public image that would be to his benefit. But go on with the master plan.
Well, I think surely the emperor is naked now.
Well, you can see that. Other people still tell me about how wonderful his robes are.
Well, I think it's Gove and the people behind him from the start. They've used Boris to win the election in the way that a Formula One team has qualifying tyres to get to pole position, and then the big guns come in, and I think that was the plot from the start. And Gove and his associates, and I think Cummings may well be in on it.
I don't agree with you as it all being planned in advance. I think elements of what you say I agree with wholeheartedly.
So you think they got lucky?
Who?
The Gove. This is the opportunity.
I think a reason why so much focus is on his girlfriend is because the previously tight cabal of Vote Leave has been fractured by external influences. I'm not close enough to the pitch to know whether it is all down to Carrie Symonds, and I'm uncomfortable with some of the portrayal. The problem is you lurch into everyday sexism both ways. If you say, let's defend the lady, that would be chivalrous. That's a form of sexism. But equally, if you say, she's a Machiavellian Lady Macbeth type character, that's also a form of sexism, potentially, until we know the facts. But I don't think that the plan... I mean, Gove probably has had his eye on the prize. There's an astonishing vignette in one of the biographies, I can't remember which one, when they're at Chequers with the Camerons, and Gove's children, I don't know if you've heard this story, Bob, Gove's children burst into the room and say, Mummy, isn't it true that we're going to live here one day? So obviously they've overheard parental conversations in the car.
I don't think they're going to be disappointed either.
I do. I mean, the stalking horse never wins, for a start, and right. I don't think Gove has any... I don't know what his support's like in the party. It's something we can talk to Theo Ushwood about later, but... I mean, you describe Boris Johnson's popularity with the public. I've never met anyone who would describe themselves as a fan of Michael Gove. Have you?
No. Well, that's exactly what I mean about the Tories putting Boris up, because he's popular.
Oh, well, there's no... But I think that this circular firing squad has come about as a result of things that were unforeseen. and as a result of Cummings coming. I hate people whose names end in S, because I don't know how you do the possessive. Cummings is Fury or Cummings Fury? Where does the apostrophe? I think you can have either, but it's harder out loud than it is in print. Bob, great work, thank you. What's that track, Keith, with the master plan? I've got it now, but I've got a sort of miniature earworm. I've got like an ear caterpillar, something master plan. Get in with the master plan. No, just sounding old. Patrick's in Henley-on-Thames. Patrick, what do you reckon?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Well, you missed out the piffle, didn't you? Or the
piffle, yes. Again, I'm dripping with anecdotes today. It was when lads at Eton found his passport and started teasing him for having the middle name Boris, so that it stuck. But anyway, who's telling the truth?
Yeah, well, I don't think one can imagine that Cummings is making statements like that without having the backup to do so.
Yes.
I just don't believe he would, at this stage in the battle, he would land something like that. I think he's probably got that on tape or on some sort of evidence. So I certainly think he's telling the truth, because otherwise he'd be doing himself out of the great fight ahead, wouldn't he, really?
Yes, and also I like his sort of Bond villain demeanour, because I don't know about you, but I find it perfectly possible to believe that he'd have had some sort of spy cam on a pen in his top pocket, or a kind of,
absolutely,
a bugged umbrella or something like that.
He wouldn't cut. I mean, that's a huge sort of accusation to make, and without any evidence, he'd have made himself look a fool. So,
and he keeps saying, I want to talk to the select committee. I want to talk to the select committee. His mates are briefing the media, and I think often when you read friends of the journalist involved, certainly in my experience, has actually spoken to the source. I'm just speaking generally. I'm not suggesting that's what's happened here, but that is that's not unknown in such matters. But the fact that, or rather the claim that he has kept audio recordings of key conversations has not ended up in the news today by accident.
Yeah, exactly. So he's telling the truth. It will come out. But could I just make one point, which I think sort of been missed about this Johnson, the piffle man? It's perfectly evident that, I mean, it's not difficult to see that he set all his guidelines of success. But from Donald Trump as the Academy of Human and Financial and Political Arts, he based his future on Trump.
Do you think?
And I mean, he took one look at him. That's how he's been acting ever since. But he relied on that worship of Trump to provide, all a lot of the Brexit deal, the US. That's all fallen apart. He hasn't got Trump anymore. Trump is old orange news, and Biden thinks Johnson is a sort of shape-shifting creep, I gather.
Reportedly, one of his key advisors.
And it's kind of left. I mean, there's no way that Johnson thought Trump was going to go.
That's the point. What's the point of Johnson if there's no Trump in America? Because
he's lost.
Yeah, the trade deal, all of it.
Yeah, he's left in gobbledygook, and I don't think he knows what to say from day to day.
And I mean, to coin a phrase, the chickens are coming home to roost. I don't know why. I probably because I'm too nice, Patrick. But I resist the complete comparison of Trump with Johnson. But it's getting ever harder, and you provide compelling evidence as to why.
It might not be complete ever. He wasn't exactly like Trump, but he looked at Trump and he thought, that's working.
Whereas everybody else, or everybody decent, looked at Trump and thought, oh my God, that's terrifying.
Yeah,
look how close even a Western liberal democracy can teeter upon the edge of out-and-out fascism. We looked at it and got scared. Some people looked at it and thought, interesting.
Yeah, but what they share massively is ego, full stop.
Yeah. Absolutely overweening, overarching, overcoming ego. What is the single most important thing on Boris Johnson's to-do list every single minute of every single day of every single year? Answer, Boris Johnson. Thank you, Patrick. You've made me a little late for the news. It's 11 o'clock. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Excuse me. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where, I mean, it is astonishing, when you think of the coverage given to Diane Abbott, drinking a mojito on a train, or Keir Starmer owning a field that was worth a lot of money many, many years after he bought it so that his disabled mother could continue to run her donkey sanctuary. God, down with that sort of thing, eh? It's incredible, right? So here we are looking at the stories from the last 7 days involving Boris Johnson. 7 days, okay? Reports that he tried every trick in the book to avoid paying for the decoration job, the £60,000 worth of decoration undertaken at his flat before finally coughing for it himself and sending out hapless fools like Liz Truss and Ben Wallace to claim that everything was completely above board and Bristol fashion. The claim that in response to it being put out there that Dominic Cummings was responsible for leaks about the flat, I think it was about the flat, it's hard to keep up, but the claim that he wanted to call off an investigation into who'd leaked details of the second lockdown, details that actually the leak caused deaths, I think it's fair to say, because I don't know if you remember, and completely forgivable if you don't, it's so hard to keep up. Everybody rushed out at breakneck speed to sort of get in some celebrations and socialising before the second lockdown kicked in. So that leak investigation he reportedly wanted to call off because it was believed that it would lead to Henry Newman, whose name you probably don't know or need to know, but he is one of the best friends of the girlfriend of Carrie Symonds, who was also, of course, responsible for the decoration of the flat. And then finally, a story that appears to have come from the Cummings camp. Boris Johnson wanted to let the bodies pile high in their thousands. Those bits are in quotes, which means that the appearance of claims that Cummings has got tapes seems to me to be significant, rather than announce the third lockdown, which he eventually announced belatedly and so confusingly that it did actually cause bodies to pile high in their thousands anyway. Go on, give me a ring and have a crack at defending him. 0345 606 0973. Sorry, I said 7 days. You've got the resignation on Friday night of his key consigliere, Edward Lister, who I think has already been elevated into the House of Lords. God, is there a more tarnished ennoblement since, I don't know, Richard III than being put in the House of Lords by Boris Johnson? I don't know, but we'll find out more about that shortly. He sat down for a meeting with Edward Woodward, the chief exec, or I forget what his exact title is, actually, but he's the sort of head UK man at United, just a couple of days before that abortive attempt to launch a European Super League. He sat down with one of the founding members of it, but apparently the subject of the European Super League never came up. The executive vice chairman, there you go. And, of course, the texts, swapping cosy texts with James Dyson, who was seeking preferential tax treatment for his staff and reportedly himself, while people who actually had ventilators that were good to go couldn't get through to anybody or indeed get anybody to take the ventilators, culminating in a call we took last week from a sales executive at one of those companies explaining that by the time the government, the Department of Health, actually got in touch with them to take up their offer of ventilators, they'd sold them all to Scottish and Irish health trusts. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. Wendy is in Southampton. Wendy, what's it going to be? Place your bets. Place your bets, Wendy.
OK, James. Hello there.
Hello.
I'm going to believe Dominic Cummings, and the reason is because it was summed up brilliantly over the weekend by Dominic Grieve that Boris Johnson is a void of integrity.
Yeah, but you know, Dominic Grieve's just a lefty axe grind. He's just a Labour Party. Oh, no, you mean Dominic Grieve, the former Conservative Attorney General?
Yes, that's the one. The one who's not going anywhere, not joining any other party. But I'd love you to get that phrase trending, like you've got your Steve Brexit hard man. I think we should just refer to Boris void of integrity Johnson.
Wasn't it a vacuum? Was it a void or a vacuum?
It was void.
Was it?
It was void.
I thought it was vacuum. Anyway, it doesn't matter, does it? It was one of my catchphrases last year. In the absence of clarity and leadership, it creates a vacuum into which anything can move.
Absolutely.
I don't knock about with politicians for obvious reasons, and they're not all bad. Some of them are really good people who went into it for all the right reasons, and you know, I personally think that applies to all parties, but the Conservative Party in particular, post Purge, when they got rid of the Grieves and the Rory Stewarts and that, it's very hard to know what's left. I mean, what's left is so dismal it almost makes Jeremy Hunt look like an honourable figure.
Well, absolutely. I mean, he's been quite popular since he lost the leadership election. Yeah.
It's a funny one, isn't it? But I mean, you're right. If you've got the former Conservative Attorney General describing a Conservative Prime Minister as being a void or a vacuum of integrity, then in a normal world you've got problems. But of course in Brexit Britain you've got journalists queuing up to tell you there's nothing to see here, no big deal at all, which is, the more you think about it, both understandable and incredible. And it may well work. That's the problem, isn't it, with having the newspapers owned by this tiny, tiny cabal of self-interested billionaires, which, of course, makes you wonder why the Daily Mail has broken ranks on this one. Thank you, Wendy. 0345 60973 is the number that you need. I would really like someone to tell me that they think Cummings is the one with the calumnies, and Johnson is a man more sinned against than sinning, but we're struggling so far. I will not lie to you. If you listen to this programme chiefly out of masochism, if you tune in to get enraged and angry and all of those, that's fine. You know, it all counts. But how do you process this now, particularly given that the attempt to sort of knit the Vote Leave cabal together was previously quite successful? So you've been defending Gove, you've been defending Patel, you've been defending Cummings. You pretended to believe the Barnard Castle lines. Now, what do you do now? What do you do now? Now that the two horses you've backed are fighting with each other, that's a slightly mixed metaphor, but still it works. What do you do now? How do you actually... I mean, do you accept the invitation to pretend that this is no big deal? Because the alternative is to examine everything that you've done politically for the last 5 or 6 years. Cummings is a genius. Johnson is a brilliant leader. And together they're unstoppable. Well, how do you process the fact that they are both accusing each other of moral corruption? And who do you believe? 0345 6060973. For the record, they're both morally corrupt, of course. But in the context of the current stories, you can pick one. You can pick a side. And actually, I think you have to, for once. If you're in that team, which player retains your loyalty while the other one gets cast out into the wilderness? And how do you arrive at that conclusion? Or is it just too late? You're still shouting about how wonderful the Emperor's new clothes are, even as the tailor, Dominic Cummings, has finally got around to admitting that there weren't any new clothes at all. Boyd's in Reading. Boyd, what would you like to say?
Well, I believe Cummings because
everybody does so far. Why?
I know it's terrible, but I take Johnson back to the time. I organised a football match in about 1999 where Johnson played for England against the Germany squad.
Oh, yeah.
And he was so incompetent at the time, he decided to rugby tackle one of the German players on the pitch and just sort of laughed it off. And that, I think, talking about players, that set the whole ball rolling for his celebrity shenanigans, which have just gone on and on. I mean, Cummings is a professional and Boris is an amateur. And you can take Boris and you can look at his Mayor of London stuff where he did some wrong things. When he went to, I think it was Burma, when he started quoting Kipling. So many lies. And his professional and personal life just so intertwined where he lies all the time. You've just got to say that Cummings has got the upper hand in this one. And that's just the way. It's intolerable. I think there are two songs, that lyrics that come to mind when I think about Boris. The first one is the Manic Street Preachers. If we tolerate this, then our children will be next.
I nearly sang them, Boyd. I think it's everyone can breathe a sigh of relief that I didn't. It's a beautiful song.
It's just, and the other words are from the Police. Poets, priests and politicians all have words to thank for their positions. And Boris delights in quoting Latin and pretending he's so clever, and the fact that he went to Eton. If he says in meetings, I want the bodies to pile up, whatever they were. If your currency is words, and as a politician, your only currency is words, you have to pay if you are stupid enough to say that type of words. Cummings is a professional, I won't say liar, I will say a professional truth well told. Boris
propagandist. A professional and deeply effective propagandist.
Correct. And we all know what the media are like, that they will spin all the stories according to their agenda. But I can only say that the time for the British public to wake up and see what type of person Boris is, with no moral compass, no principles, whether it's knocking a kid over whilst playing rugby, whether it's tackling a German, which, okay.
But did you ever fall for it? Also, briefly, what were you doing organising that football game? That's an interesting nugget.
It was England legends versus German legends, and the money went for charity. I used to be commercial director at Reading Football Club, and we put on quite a few. This was a few years ago.
No, I remember it well. I saw some of the footage during the rounds at the weekend, actually, and it is that the rules. I mean, I know it's only a charity football game, and I use the word only advisedly, but the idea that I'm Boris Johnson, no rules apply to me, I'll go and rugby tackle that German and everyone will laugh it off, is simultaneously prescient but true, because
it was the moment that Boris got his notoriety.
Do you think so?
It honestly was. It was the start of the German bashing. It was almost a forerunner of Brexit for Johnson.
Well, you're reading a lot into it, but you were there and I wasn't. Did you fall for it? And I'm going to push you on this because I
didn't fall for it like the German player.
Hey, Badum, Tish is here all week. Try the veal. But did you fall for it? Because I did back in 2008. You didn't at all.
I've never fallen for it.
Okay.
And the reason being, James, we've spoken before about Brexit.
Yes.
My wife is French. I see things from a European perspective as well as a British perspective. It gives you a little bit of understanding when you read about what the foreign press talk about Johnson as well as what the British press is. And I would say to anybody, don't just think about what the British press say. Think about what the rest of the world sees it as. It's important.
They can't, though,
it is so important how the rest of the world sees us.
And that's why they're still doing that, sort of deriding everybody, because the alternative would be to pay attention. Do you know, I think I'm going to continue with your police lyrics to represent... I'm going to represent now, and correct me if I've misremembered, to represent the position being adopted by people who don't think that there is a big story here or think that everybody should just move along or look the other way. I think we can praise their position as the chorus of the song you quoted from, which would be "di-do-do-do, di-da-da-da, is all I want to say to you. Di-do-do-do, di-da-da-da, they're meaningless and all that's true."
I think you're right, yes. And there is an amateurish about Boris, which no matter how much he professes to be clever and he's changed his name and the Boris bikes and all the rest of it, it's a branding issue. You can only protect yourself from the branding issue if you realise that's what he's all about. And unfortunately, not enough people know that yet, but I just hope people like you and the rest of the media seem to tide is turning.
It? Well, we shall see. I mean, today the Daily Mail have very much got him in their sights, which is the only reason that people like me think that there might be movement here, because alternatively you'd be back to a media completely dominated by people who are still clinging to the carcass of Brexit and people who think that Boris Johnson is a stand-up guy. Thank you, Boyd. Great stuff, and nice memories as well. But of course, don't forget, we live in a country where people like Andrew Neil think that the media is too biased in the other direction, so much so that they're setting up their own television station. Is it GBB's? 21 minutes after 11, the Food and Drink Commission, I could get the nomenclature correct, I must do, have the Food and Drink Federation, I beg your pardon. Now, obviously, with the caveat that the Food and Drink Federation won't know as much about food and drink as Daniel Hannan or Kate Hoey. They say that the trade barriers erected in Boris Johnson's deal have cost exporters £1.1 billion since the start of the year. And by what percentage do you think milk and cream exports to the EU are down? Because you'll remember Brexit was a great idea for farmers. I feel nothing but sympathy for farmers who fell for it. I largely feel nothing but sympathy for everybody who fell for it. And I know that I can't carry on indefinitely pointing out the scale of the con, but it's all intrinsically linked. Johnson and Cummings would not have been at the heart of government if it hadn't been for the success of the Brexit con. And the fact that it was a con, the fact that the entire regime, the entire administration was built upon lies made of bull something, bricks made of lies, means that it was bound to crumble. The only question was when. And the greatest tragedy, of course, of all, and the greatest failure for people like me, is that we were desperate to avoid having these liars and charlatans in charge in the event of something epic occurring, something that needed real clarity and leadership. It's why the general election of 2019 was such a dispiriting and depressing spectacle for so many of us. Talking today about a rock and a hard place, but the general election 2019 was the apotheosis of a choice between a rock and a hard place, and the fear of what would happen if a major national emergency emerged. And now we know, one of the highest death rates on the entire planet. And the two key architects of pandemic management, arguing with each other over who was... So what you've got, and this is incredible, and again, the obvious caveat that the vaccines have and continue to go brilliantly well, although I suspect that by the end of summer it'll be a fairly even playing field. We got away to a creditable and deeply desirable head start. But you've got people like Wallace, the Secretary of State for Flags and Defence, marching around studios today, trying to change the subject from the astonishing circular firing squad emerging from Downing Street and claim success, which is incredible, isn't it, given the death rate and given the fact that Cummings, the key consigliere at the time, is now making a lot of noise about how awful the management was of the pandemic. It really is heads and tails territory, times a million. But the mess remains. And that's why it feels like a side order now, the fact that sales of milk and cream to the EU have gone down by, wait for it, should we do it Bruce Forsyth style? Do you want to play your cards right? So what do you think? Gone down by what? How much? How much have they gone down by? No, higher. What percentage? Higher. Higher. There's nothing in this game for two in a bed. 96% they've gone down by. Now, again, they will go up again a bit, but my goodness me, farmers. Chicken and beef, that's all right. That's just almost 80% decline in exports. And again, some of it will come back, but the exports now will involve tariff-free barriers, which you were promised they wouldn't. 24 minutes after 11. A little bit of context to remind you why you shouldn't be surprised at all that these dishonest ferrets these dishonest characters are now fighting like ferrets in a sack. Phil is in Derry. Phil, what would you like to say?
Well, obviously it's this Cummings-Johnson conversation.
Yes. Who do you believe?
I find it really... Oh, God, who do you believe? Even using the word believe in relation to either of those two. I'm going to say I do believe Cummings at the moment, but I don't believe he's saying anything true because it's honest. I think he's saying it's true because he wants to muddy the waters before the butcher's bill has to be paid. So in a year or 2 or 3 years down the line when court cases begin. I think Cummings wants to. He's going to be able to say, I was an employee and my bad boss made me do this.
Right. That's possibly unfair. I mean, you're entirely entitled to speculate like that, but it would...
It is speculation, yeah. Obviously.
No, I know it is. But there were reports this weekend that he was worried about being jailed for some of the Vote Leave shenanigans as well, of course, which, again, the British media didn't get close to covering properly.
Well, yeah, but see, here's the thing. You're a journalist. You look at things in boxes and you're pure logic. I'm a professional artist, so I imagineer all over the place.
Yes.
So I'm always making connections. So for me, I don't really see the Brexit thing and the pandemic response and the disaster as separate.
No, nor do I.
I see them all part of it. Sorry?
Nor do I. I've written a flipping book about why it's all linked. It's entirely down to the nature of leadership and the nature of political life in this country.
But it's terrifying for me in the sense that I don't think... Firstly, I don't think any of them were ever there to be leaders. No. I think they've always been there to make money or power for themselves. So now they're just squabbling because they know that this bill has to be paid.
And you mean an inquiry. Again, the Secretary of State for Flags and Defence this morning poo-pooing the idea that we should crack on with an inquiry as soon as possible. I think I heard Kate Hoey, of all people, on Nick's show suggesting similar. Why on earth wouldn't prominent Brexiters be in favour of an inquiry into the competence of the government that they put in place? Hoey, of course, another one that's ended up in the House of Lords.
Yeah, but the thing is, I mean, as an inquiry, if you've got all of these people together, all the people that have been involved in making money and improving their power while destroying the country and filling their pockets, if you put them all in the same place at the same time, you'd fill a stadium. There's the culture of dishonesty is so huge. But I think Dominic Cummings, though, he's the master of it, and I suspect he's going to come out on top.
Well, yes, I mean, that is, again, the odd thing, and again, one relies upon the jungle drums at times like this, and I guess you mentioned my profession. The more plugged in you are to journalism, perhaps the more attuned you are to which jungle drums are trustworthy and which may not be. But again, the questions about Johnson's judgment about kicking off last week and putting it out there that Cummings was the leaker, which is what has prompted Cummings' response. This is all in the space of the last 4 days, and reports that he was raging around Downing Street in the style of King Lear, who, of course, went went mad on the moor, mad with rage at his ungrateful daughters. He was also, of course, given that Phil mentioned Brexit, responsible for sticking a border down the middle of his own country. So maybe those parallels are a little more pertinent than we realise. Sarah is in Sevenoaks. Sarah, probably going to be the last word to you, because I do want to move on to the anti-sanity march that I stumbled into this weekend in London. What would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
As a person with a disability, the headline doesn't surprise me whatsoever.
Really? Oh, dear.
I have mental health illness I have all my life, anxiety, depression disorder, possibly bipolar. Anyway, my point is, I've gone through the welfare system under this government. I felt stigmatised and unwanted. And I'm not saying.
So not a contempt, a callousness, a carelessness for human life.
Yes, exactly.
Same bloke that closed fire stations, of course.
As soon as I saw that headline, I went, oh, well, that's not a surprise. And I'm not a fan of Dominic Cummings. Do not get me wrong, James. But
I don't think anyone is. The Brexiters are supposed to be, but they're so bent double today, not knowing which way to jump, that we haven't been able to find a single one.
But if I had to choose, I would choose. I'm strongly on,
Yeah, right. I mean, this is it. Rock in a hard place. It's rock all day long, isn't it? Was that unanimous, Keith? Have you been keeping track? I think it was pretty unanimous. I don't think anybody came out and suggested that they think the Prime Minister might be telling the truth, which prompts two responses from me. One, well, there is a first time for everything. And two, listen to what I just said. Nobody thinks the Prime Minister is telling the truth. Still, at least you've got a blue passport? I don't know. Does that work now? Is that still a thing? Got a blue passport? It's all worth it?